Spending your evening with us. My name is Layla Levy, and I have a boutique travel concierge called Travel Design by Layla Levy. And since the COVID lockdown, I started running virtual travel series. And so far, we've traveled all over the world from Spain, Morocco, Peru, Antarctica. We had some safari trips. But one of the other very important topics that I typically see that is less talked about is around travel insurance. And I get a lot of travel insurance questions. So this evening, I decided to dedicate one of those virtual travel series to learning more about travel insurance. So again, get yourself comfortable, get a glass of wine. We're going to run this as more like a Q&A session. I have a very special, knowledgeable guest, so we're gonna pick his brain about everything insurance and leave your questions to the very end. But these are based on, basically the questions that we've gathered are based on frequently asked questions when it comes to travel insurance, or some of those questions that people send to me when I shared last week that we'll be talking about travel insurance. So these are partially, my audience and my fans' questions, those that I received by email, but feel free to keep your questions. If you feel that you may forget it, put it in the chat box. But let's get started. So as I briefly talked about, so for those of you who may not know me, my name is Layla Levy. And interestingly enough, my background is not in travel. So I'm an engineer by trade, and I had worked in analytics and technology for so many years. And then I had always the passion for travel. I was basically working to travel, earning money to travel. And I never, to be honest, I was never quite impressed with those travel advisors or those travel folks that I was dealing with. And I had this burning passion, and I was really great at planning trips for my family, for my extended family, for my friends. I pretty much planned all of my friends' travels, their honeymoons. And then finally, I took a leap and I started my own business. So I have a small boutique travel concierge. I've got a small team, but what I'm passionate about is building personalized travel for my clients and for my friends. And I guess one of the other things that's so important for me is to be authentic and to be unbiased, because I think that we're very different. We travel differently. We've got different value systems. And what my company does is we make tailor-make trips exactly based on your preferences and what you want. And I also have an app that I put all those itineraries into the app, and then it gets delivered through the app to my clients. So you really don't need too much of paper to carry here and there. All the travel arrangements, planning, everything is in there. And it could be, fully personalized or customized, or it could be a mixture of a package tour or a cruise or something like that, mixed with something fully personalized. So, if you have any travel related questions and inquiry, make sure to ask me, reach out to me, and myself or someone from my team will be more than happy to help you out. In the past few weeks, as I mentioned, we've been, since the COVID lockdown, and this is week number 18. So we have traveled all over the world because I am very passionate about inspiring and educating and assisting people, those travel lovers. So if you're a travel lover, you have a lot of respect from me, and I'd love to serve you. And in the past couple of months, it's hard to believe that it's been, I don't know how many weeks, but I pretty much started running those virtual travel series right after the COVID lockdown happened. And instead of being miserable at home and being not motivated, I started running those series and take people virtually to those different destinations and talking about what are the things you need to know in advance, what are the experiences, what are the popular itineraries, and why do you even need to travel to some of those destinations. So I highly encourage you to check out traveldesignbylayla.com, where I have all those recordings of the past sessions that we ran, and I brought on amazing guest speakers to help me cover that area. Or check out my Facebook page, which is Travel Design by Layla. And again, Instagram is also a great place. And the past couple of weeks, for those of you who are in Toronto, I've started focusing on local travel. As a lot of you probably in the US, and you know that we specifically have a travel ban for people from the US and to US. So a lot of us have been spending time exploring our own backyard, which, believe it or not, it's as gorgeous as you could find outside of Canada. I highly encourage you to check out the boating trip that I took on Rideau Canal with my family 2 weeks ago. So this is basically one of those, I'd call it actually hidden gems, because people don't really know much about it, that you can actually rent a boat and you are the captain or whoever you decide. So it's a self-driving boat. You get on it and you start, you have your own agenda. You could do whatever you want to do. There is no need for licenses, or they train you there. And it's a fantastic way of exploring Rideau Canal, which is the only UNESCO World Heritage Site in Ontario. And it's also an amazing way to explore Canada, and it's not very far from Toronto. So I highly encourage you to check those experiences. I also have created some guides and itineraries for weekend trips and long weekend trips for Prince Edward County, and we had one specific session about Prince Edward County. That for people outside of Canada, that's an area closer to Toronto, full of winery, amazing food experiences, and we covered that extensively. So check those out. But as I mentioned, I strongly believe in the travel insurance, and the travel insurance is a must. I have to admit, a lot of times, I'm a fairly healthy young person, and I never thought that I may need travel insurance at times. And things happen for me in my trips, and I really needed to rely on the insurance that at times, again, I have to admit, I wasn't really sure that I really need that. And I guess now I swear by the insurance, and I don't go anywhere without making sure that I have insurance. But it's one of those topics that it's less talked about, it's less sexy, is unpopular topic. And I really saw the need, and I got lots of questions as people are starting thinking about traveling, that they need to better understand the travel insurance, specifically during the COVID and post-COVID, and everything that you need to know about travel insurance in general. So I have a very special guest that I wanted to introduce you to him. So Hutan, please feel free to unmute yourself and turn on your video and start introducing yourself.
Hello, my name is Hutan. I do insurance, as Layla said. I've been doing insurance. I've been in the insurance industry since '96 in Toronto. So I'm pretty, I like to think I'm pretty knowledgeable in insurance, in all sorts of different insurance. I'm a broker, so I deal with every insurance company, and hopefully I can answer all your questions, and that's it. That's pretty short and simple.
Awesome. And if you wanted to follow Hutan, feel free to check out Facebook tipsservices.ca, or on Instagram, or reach out to Hutan directly, but let's get into, you know, one of the things that I don't really think that if you're here, it means that you value travel insurance, you understand the importance of travel insurance. So Hutan, unless you wanted to talk a few points about why travel insurance, I guess we have some other interesting areas and topics that we wanted to cover.
Sure. Well, I think travel insurance is very important. I get travel insurance myself every time I go anywhere outside of Ontario. Now, for Canada, we have OHIP, and OHIP does cover, but there are limits to the coverage. But I personally think, because I've had the experience of needing the travel insurance for my family, so I think it's very important. And there's a lot of good products out there that we can take advantage of, right? So I think it's a good product to have, right? It just becomes part of the expense for travel, right? Just peace of mind, basically.
So I want to ask the first question, which we received from the audience. Do I need travel insurance when traveling in Canada? And I guess it may not be as relevant to the folks who are coming from US, but correct me if I'm wrong, Hutan, but I think this year, actually 2020, there were some changes to the OHIP coverages, which is the coverage, health coverage by the government, that typically I think it was more, and now it's pretty much cut down to, I don't remember the exact figure, but very, very low amount. So even traveling in Canada, if you're going outside of your province, is now tricky.
Well, yeah, OHIP, obviously, the Ontario version of it, we are still covered for the things that you're covered in Ontario, but there's a lot of things that OHIP doesn't cover. For instance, ambulances, the services that are not covered by OHIP, those are the things that you can take advantage of. For instance, if the traveler needs to come back to Ontario for treatment, air by air or by any means, those are the things that travel insurance cover. Assistance services, if they need long-term care, or laboratory, these are the things that OHIP doesn't cover, and travel insurance can cover. And one thing that you have to know that if you're traveling only in Canada, there are companies that will give you 50% off of the regular price, because they know a lot of the services are covered by OHIP. They do give that extra benefit. So it's going to actually cost you much, much less to get the insurance, to have the insurance in place for that extra coverages, and obviously pay less. So it is a good idea.
Sure. So another question, another follow-up question to this. So let's say that if someone travels from Ontario to BC and they're going hiking and they fall down, they break their leg. So that is covered based on, because that is something that OHIP would cover in Ontario, that would also be covered in BC. Is that correct?
They would cover it, but let's say if they need, I don't know, a test done, extra test. Let's say if they can't go to a hospital, they need to go to a private medical care. Things like that, those kind of things are not covered by OHIP. Normal things are, but let's say they need to come back to Toronto. Let's say they drove to BC, as you mentioned, and now, God forbid, they broke their leg, they can't drive. They need someone to drive the car back to Ontario. Those are the things that are covered with your travel insurance plan, right? So basically, prescription drugs that are not prescribed in the hospital, right? So you're not administered in the hospital, but you do need prescription drugs. Those things are covered with your travel insurance. There's a lot of things that OHIP doesn't cover, as we know, even in Ontario, right? So those are the things that we could take advantage of with travel insurance.
Okay, awesome. So next question, a lot of, at least I would say my clients are in those, I don't want to use the word seniors, but they have some sort of existing medical condition. So can you tell us more about getting travel insurance for those who have an existing medical condition, and if they need to fill a questionnaire, can you also elaborate a little bit on that too?
Well, okay, good question. The pre-existing condition for travelers, there is different tier system. So when you fill out the medical questionnaire, let's say a company
Do
like, for example,
you mind coming a little bit closer? Because
sure,
I guess you're a little bit further.
there was there was sun shining, so that's why I thought I should go back a little bit. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, so a company like Alliance, they have a tier system. I believe they have like a 4-tier system. So depending on the medical conditions that the traveler has, they're going to get that system based on the questionnaire that you answer. So I strongly urge that the questionnaire is answered as accurately as possible, because that's what dictates what section you fall under. Now, obviously, it's gonna, if there's more illnesses, it might cost you more, but you can get insurance. That's the most important thing. Very seldom all companies are gonna deny you. For instance, myself, what I do is for certain clients, I go with different companies because I know, for instance, let's just say Alliance is extremely good with diabetes, right? And they don't consider diabetes as one of the top illnesses, as long as it's not associated with another illness. So we can pick and choose which company we go with depending on the illness. But there are tier system in place where if it's only, let's say, blood pressure and those kind of things, they don't matter. If one thing that's very important, especially with snowbird insurance, is the length of time the person is stable. That's one thing that I think when you're getting insurance, you should check. Majority of times it's 180 days, but there are plans that only ask for 90-day stable period. So as long as the person has a medical condition, but it's been stable for the past 180 days, that's fine, right? So the pre-existing condition is not that big of an issue as long as it's stable, but the medical questionnaire is the most important, that it should be answered accurately. Now, if it means that you don't understand the question, what I recommend is usually check with your doctor just to make sure that it's accurate, because you don't want that question to arise at the time of claim, basically, right?
For sure. One of the examples that it happened to actually one of my clients, and that's why I think a lot of younger healthy people don't take travel insurance as serious. And I had a honeymoon booked for a couple, and they're young, they're in their early 30s, and within the couple of months of booking and the wedding, so the bride was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Although I had really emphasized on the importance of travel insurance, and I guess we're gonna get to some of the credit card insurance that a lot of people again think that they're covered. Unfortunately, they didn't get the travel insurance, and I was able to recoup a lot of money back. But if they have travel insurance, they could have claimed pretty much the entire trip that they had spent on. So again, for everyone who's listening to this, don't think that we are young and healthy and it's not going to happen to us, and it's just happens to other people. It happens a lot to younger folks, especially because again we don't take it that as seriously. So moving on into trip cancellation. So Hootan, tell us more about trip cancellation, trip protection, and what does that mean in the travel in insurance?
Yeah, so actually you brought up a really good point regarding the people that you were talking about. If these people had a trip cancellation, they would have got all their money back. It's the biggest reason for trip cancellation is sickness or, God forbid, death. So if a person has that prior to, if they have the insurance in place and the sickness happens, then they do get their money back. But if it's a pre-existing condition that was not, disclosed, they're not going to be covered. Now, With trip cancellation, it's a very broad, topic, because there are few plans that don't have any restrictions, but majority of plans have restrictions. For instance, if the trip cancellation happens because of, let's say, act of war, suicide, pre-existing condition, anything regarded to mental illness, they're not covered. So it's very important to see, to look at the booklet, to read the booklet, and to make sure what the exclusions are. Every insurance company provides the booklet at the time of when you buy the insurance. It's important to go over it. I know Manulife does have a plan that doesn't have a restriction, but it's very limited. You have to get it at the time that you're purchasing your ticket. You can't get it afterwards, but I do believe you can have that that doesn't have any restrictions, right?
And I think that the trip cancellation would have been something that, for example, for those of folks who had, made plans or made, bookings, and then the COVID situation happened, and then, if they had trip cancellation, they could have simply just, canceled and they get all their money back. Or was that not the case, Hutan?
That was the case up to March. So if, let's say, March 17th, so if that happened and because of COVID, borders closed, they would have got their money back. Now it's a little bit different. Now because that's already been in place, the COVID, if the person has trip cancellation, now obviously it depends on the company. The reason why I keep saying depends on the company, because there are few companies, there's about 10 companies that are very active in travel insurance, and all of them have different different regulations, different guidelines. So that's why. But anyways, there are companies that do cover COVID, but as long as the illness happens to the traveler or the traveler's companion, the people on the policy, not if, let's say, there's a second wave and there's the borders are closed up again, not for that. If they themselves get the illness, then they are eligible for it. I know Alliance does do that. They do allow COVID, right? And Destination Canada, I believe, does well.
Okay, I have some other specific questions when it comes to COVID, because that is obviously a very popular topic, but I think it's just few slides later on. So one of the other things that, again, I have to deal with it for a lot of my clients is they say, I have travel insurance as part of my credit cards, and they don't really know what's covered, because let's be honest, who really reads that all this big booklet that it comes with your credit card? So literally no one. So one of the tools, and I'm gonna get your thoughts, Hutan, too, but one of the tools that I recommend is the InsureEye website. It works for US and Canada, so you could just put in your credit card by your bank. So pick which your bank is, select the type of your card, and it simplifies what sort of coverage you have for that credit card. And it has been a very, very helpful tool to basically simplify what are those coverages that you have. For example, a lot of credit cards, they don't cover you if you're above 65 or I think 60, or they are, there are things that they cover or they don't cover. And this is a great tool that I always recommend for, for my clients to go and check it out, because just for peace of mind. And if we know that this is something that you're really not covered, then we'll definitely look into getting a good travel insurance for you guys.
Yeah. See, with the credit card, I look at it as a secondary insurance. What I mean by that is, personally, I have travel insurance on my credit card, but I usually get insurance for myself. The one reason that I notice is that majority of credit cards have a maximum days of number of trips. So between 7 to 14 days. That's the only amount of time that they allow per trip. Same as a group insurance. If you've got a group employer plan, those cover you up to 60 days, most of them, 30 to 60. But so what happens with the credit card is if your trip is longer than, let's say, that 7 day, then you're not covered for the remainder of the trip. So what you can do is you can get what is called a top-up insurance, but you have to make sure you get it before you leave before you leave your province. And what happens is that the insurance company will cover you from the day after. So let's say if the maximum the number of days is 7, the coverage starts from the 8th day, right? So it's a very good idea to look at the coverage with your credit card company and then make sure you get a top up to cover you for the remainder of your trip, right? If you want to take advantage of that.
Excellent point. So for snowbirds, and a lot of folks who are going longer time outside of Canada, how is the situation with that? Does this sort of like work with this top up, for example, or do they just need to get this anyway because they would likely stay more than 30 or 60?
Yeah, that's the thing with snowbird insurance. Usually, majority of the time, they're there for the winter season. So it's minimum, let's say 3 months. So credit cards are not going to be that, travel insurance are not going to be that useful. Now, they could use it, they could take advantage of it and use that 7, 10, 14 days or whatever number of days that they're covered for. But what I usually see is that people get that insurance for the total number of days that they're going. Because basically they want to make sure they're covered, and that's it. Yeah, so I don't see a lot of people use the credit card for their snowbird insurance.
Mm-hmm. Okay, moving on to almost COVID related topics. So how does a travel advisory issued by the government affect travel coverage?
Very important. Travel advisory is extremely important, even if it wasn't COVID related. Like for instance, if you're going to a place that you think there's a travel advisory, make sure you check it and make sure you check with your insurance company. Majority of insurance company will not cover anything that's in the guidelines of travel advisory. For instance, now that we're talking about that, right now there's a global travel advisory on COVID. So any illness related directly or even indirectly to COVID-19 is not covered outside of Canada, okay? And which is very important. Now, there's a little exclusion I have to say. If the person has got that insurance prior to March 17, from specific companies. For instance, 21st Century right now, if a client had the insurance prior to March 17, they could actually get coverage for COVID. There's a little bit of restrictions. For instance, the coverage is only going to be for 500,000, and it's covered by Manulife, not 21st Century. But what they've done is they've organized, they basically arranged for a plan to have for the special cases that have had the insurance from prior to March 17. But anybody after March 17, COVID-19 is not covered for outside of Canada. Okay.
So the follow-up question to that, so one of the things that I am asked a lot these days is, so people now start to think about, travel in later 2020, hypothetically. There's so many destinations that are opening up south of the border, Dominican Republic, Mexico, Aruba. So many of those, south destinations that a lot of Canadians, and I know folks from the US go, are opening up, and they are taking all the safety measures. But now as people are thinking about potentially traveling later on or even early 2021, what is the situation with the coronavirus coverages for travel insurance, and how many of those companies are offering COVID travel insurance, or something that has that already included?
Unfortunately, I don't know any company that's covering it right now until the global advisory is lifted. The only thing that you can have related to Corona is if you have the trip cancellation on your plan, and let's say the traveler, God forbid, gets Corona prior to leaving, or one of the travelers, let's say if there are two, one of the travelers gets the COVID-19, and then that's the only way they'll pay they can use the trip cancellation. Other than that, as of this point, there is no coverage for COVID-19 related anywhere, right? Until they release the ban. Now, what's important that I keep stressing this, related directly or indirectly, even if it's indirectly related, it's not covered, right? Because that's it's a fine point, but it's important for people to know that. You're listening.
Okay, so that means that, for example, if I decide that I want to go to Jamaica for a week in November, and if, God forbid, anything happens during my trip, and even though I had purchased travel insurance, if it's directly or indirectly related to COVID, this will, none of that expenses would be covered.
Exactly. As of this point, it won't be covered.
Okay.
If the ban is taken off, if the advisor is off, then that's a different story. But as of this point, I would say the simple question is, yeah, it's not covered.
Okay. Another question that was submitted is about what is the maximum number of days I can buy travel insurance for?
There are no maximum number of days. You can get it for any number of days. Usually we get it for a maximum of 1 year, maximum, and then we'll renew it again. I haven't seen people get it for longer than 1 year, but technically there's no restrictions. With travel insurance, there isn't. Now, as I mentioned before, with credit card, there is. I haven't seen over 14 days, and then with group insurance, there's 30 and 60 days. That's the ones I have seen. But with travel insurance, there's no maximum. You can get as many number of days. Unless I should mention something, unless you go with an annual plan. Because some people can get travel annual plan, then that one, we can have a maximum. If the number of maximum travel days is shorter, the premium is going to be less. So what that means is you can get an annual plan, but with a maximum number of days of, let's say, 14 days, or you can have an annual plan with a maximum number of days of 60 days, right? So the longer that period, the more expensive it will be. But basically, with an annual plan, you can travel as many times as you want within that period, and you're covered for that coverage.
Okay, excellent. Who do I call if I have an emergency while traveling?
Well, there's always, the companies always have, they provide the claim information. Usually there is few companies that always are doing the claims. The insurance companies, these are they're processing it, but the claims are usually done by 3-4 different companies. It's a very good idea that it doesn't matter if you're traveling or visitors to Canada. It's a very good idea for you to contact the insurance company as soon as possible. Before, I remember when I first started in the business, what we used to do is we used to keep all the claims and then submit them at the end when the person came back to Canada. Now it doesn't work that way. Now the companies ask you to submit call in and open the claim as soon as it occurs. Now, usually in the policy booklet, the companies require a 24 to 48 hour period but I've seen them allow even up to 30 days. They just want that claim to be open as soon as possible, and I urge that as well. I think it's the best, the good idea to just call, let them know, and open up the claim basically.
Excellent. Um, are my dependents covered?
With travel insurance that you buy from a company, everybody is the name, it's the name of the people are on the policy. It doesn't matter how old they are, will indicate it on the policy. So every person is covered, yes. And that's one of the advantages that I think. I always tell people, I say, listen, you have to have the policy, the name of the insured has to be on the policy, and it has to be accurate, so dependents are covered because we do indicate them on the policy.
I think for the credit card insurance ones are a little bit tricky. You have to read that through to see whether that's one companion, all the companion, whoever that is, or if I don't know, if a husband is using the wife's credit card and maybe the wife is not in on that trip, would that be covered or not? I think those are very, very tricky situations that you really have to refer to that booklet.
The fact you just mentioned something, I had a client that his wife had a credit card, but she checked with her credit card company and her husband wasn't insured. So what we did was we got the insurance for the husband. The wife used the credit card, as you mentioned, but because the husband wasn't insured, we only got the insurance for the husband. So in that particular case, the dependents were not covered, right? But it's good to check with the company. What I would do is I would definitely call them prior to leaving the province to make sure, right?
And one of the other topics that it's quite popular is when we've got visitors from outside the country coming to Canada. So if you don't mind talking about the insurance for the visitors as well, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, with the visitors to Canada insurance is a little bit different than traveling. For instance, the maximum amount of coverage, it depends on how much you apply for. With travelers, the maximum amount is set from on the policy. Usually it's about 5 million or 10 million. With visitors to Canada, it can go as low as 10,000, 25, 50, 100,000, 150. Maximum that I've seen is 300,000. That means the insurance company will cover up to that amount. Obviously, there's deductible that you can choose between zero deductible or let's say $1,000 deductible. The same thing applies with the number of days. Now, with visitors to Canada, COVID-19 is covered. As long as there is no doctor that's advising the traveler not to travel, and also the fact that the traveler does not have any symptoms prior to landing in Canada. If those things are, if they don't have those things, COVID-19 for the traveler is covered. Now, one thing that I should mention, if the person is in Canada and they have a side trip, so they go outside, let's say they go to US for let's say a week. They are even covered for COVID during that period, but once they come back, they're no longer covered. So that's very important. Now, obviously, again, these depends on the company. For instance, this one that I'm mentioning is 21st Century. But you should check with your company if it is covered. But worst case scenario, there are companies that cover it. So let's say if you speak to a broker and they have access to different companies like myself, then I can get you a company that does cover it. So there are companies that do cover Corona for visitors to Canada.
Okay. Yeah, I think we briefly talked about the claim process, but if there was anything else that you wanted to mention as part of that process, or how long typically does it take for that claim to be processed, I think that would be great.
Okay, how long, it all depends on what the issues were, if there's any ongoing issues, first of all, then if the documents are in order. I've seen them to be paid very quickly, and unfortunately, I've seen it take very long time. So I don't think there's an easy answer to say it's going to take, let's say, 1 week, right? I've seen as early as, let's say, I would say 10 days for it to be paid. Now, one thing that you mentioned about the claims that's very important is majority of time the claims are usually paid by the insured first, and then the insurance company will reimburse the client back, right? Now, if it's a large amount, the company might be able to deal directly with the institution. If that's an issue, before actually having the claim, you should check with your insurance company to find out if that insurance company has direct billing in that area. So for instance, let's say the traveler is in the States and something happens, you can call the insurance company, the claims department, let them open up the claim and let them know, ask them which institution, medical places do you have direct billing with, right? If they do have that in that state, then you don't have to worry about it. They'll deal with it directly. It all depends on let's say, that hospital in that location, if they do direct billing or not. Because insurance companies are all set up for direct billing now, but some of the providers are not.
Okay.
Right?
Okay, excellent. I guess that was all the questions that we have
I
gathered.
can answer thank you too.
Sorry, no, we're not at the thank you point yet. So I am just going through. So feel free, if you have questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions. But there are few in the chat box, which I am going to ask. So Jeanette is asking, do any companies refund the cost of policy if trip is canceled?
It depends. It depends. Why was it canceled, right? And again, as we mentioned, it could be, right? But there's a reason behind it. As I mentioned before, there is a company that Manulife does have a plan, I believe, that doesn't ask any question, but majority of companies, there are certain guidelines that they would allow cancellation. So just, change of mind is not one of them. But I believe Manulife does have a plan that does.
Yeah, it's like for any reason, you could actually cancel that. It's for Manulife.
But as we mentioned before, just to answer your listener, you must get it at the time of the ticket, right? Yeah. Is that right? Okay.
That is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, within 72 hours of the purchase. Mm-hmm. But that's it's called PPP. I forgot what it stands for, but it's actually a very great product by Manulife.
Beautiful product. Yeah, that one, because the fact that you can cancel at any time. Yeah, that's a great product.
Awesome. Okay, so there is another question on, does it matter when the insurance is purchased? I don't know if that was relevant to Jeanette. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask if this was related to that COVID time or
No, I was thinking that when you plan a trip and as soon as you start booking a trip, should you buy the insurance then, or can you wait until, let's say, like a week before the trip and buy the insurance then? Like, when should you buy travel insurance?
You should buy, especially if you're going to have cancellation, you should buy it as soon as possible. You should avoid buying, because I've seen this happen. You should not buy when you leave the country or leave your province, because if you do that, then usually companies have a 48-hour wait, like a grace period or waiting period before the coverage kicks in. So that's the most important, leaving the province. But technically, I would advise the traveler to buy it as soon as possible, especially if they're going to have trip cancellation and trip interruption. Because let's say, they get, God forbid, COVID, and then they can get their money back, or one of the illnesses, one of the exclusions that, it's not excluded. So I would advise to get as soon as possible. From an insurance company's point of view, it doesn't matter. They can get it at any time.
Yeah, I totally agree. Jeanette, some of the products or some of the policies, you can only get it within the 72 hours of the time of the booking. So you can't, for example, that PPP that we just mentioned, which is Emmanuel Life policy. I don't know where you are, but if you're in Canada, Manulife is one of the travel insurance or any kind. They're actually quite a large insurance company, and one of their policies, the PPP, which covers quite extensively pretty much everything, that does only cover if it's purchased within the 72 hours of the booking of the trip.
Yeah, exactly. It's always a good idea to get it as soon as possible. Because don't forget, there's another reason to forget about all the, the trip interruptions and stuff like that. Let's say if from the time that you get the that you get the ticket, there's a God forbid an illness, right? Then if you get the insurance afterwards, now this becomes a pre-existing condition, right? So it's always advisable to get the insurance as soon as possible.
Yeah, it's exactly like the case that I mentioned about that,
Yeah.
that
Oh, yeah.
and the honeymoon trip that I had booked for them. If they had, had purchased the travel insurance at that time, where she was healthy, they could have get all their money back.
Mhm.
So there are one other question on the COVID. What was that time frame? You said March, was that March 17? So everything, so for example, actually, I asked one of my questions. So I have a client, she has to make an urgent trip to US in August, so within 2 weeks or so. And she called her credit card insurance, they are covering everything but COVID. Can she get anything that covers COVID or no? I think.
No, that day that I was talking about was March 17, and that was, I believe, the day that the travel advisory was put in place. But with 21st Century, which is actually part of Manulife, but with 21st Century, if anybody had the coverage prior to March 17, they could have it. Anybody that got it afterwards, no, it's not. Right now, it's not covered. Again, directly or indirectly.
Okay, excellent. So I don't see any other question. I take that as a compliment that we covered all of your questions and there was not anything else that you wanted to find out. We
One
are.
thing I want to mention, sorry to cut you off, Leila. One thing I want to mention, I strongly advise people when you're getting travel insurance to do a little search. For instance, speak to a broker that deals with different companies because there's a lot, the price can vary a lot. For instance, if the person is under the age of 30, there are companies that offer a very competitive rate. So if you speak to if you speak to your broker or do your search online, I think it's a good idea because the price can vary a lot. Now, I'll be happy, obviously, to answer any question that people have. You can call me or email me, but even if not me, anybody else, I strongly advise that not just go with the first company. Right now, companies are very competitive and they want to get your business. So the prices can vary a lot.
I have one more thing to ask. I had 2 trips planned and I bought the insurance very, very early, but COVID came in and now the insurance, I think I just lost money because I bought the insurance early. Because what they're saying to me is, we'll give you a credit for to use this like next year. And so now I have 2 policies out there and I probably won't travel next year. So all that money is lost. Is there any way to avoid losing money by buying travel insurance early?
Well, did you have travel insurance?
I bought the insurance because I was going to Africa. I'm in New Jersey. I was going to Africa, so I know you need insurance. So I bought it very, very early. I was going to Caribbean. I bought insurance very, very early. So now COVID came in, and so now I was told all you can get is a credit to use that insurance next year.
As far as I know, in Canada, if you have travel insurance, trip cancellation on your travel insurance, you could get your money back if the person themselves if the travelers themselves got COVID. Not
Yeah.
that if the borders are closed or you can't go because of COVID. So unfortunately, because of COVID, they're not going to pay. But if the person themselves get COVID, they do pay for trip cancellation. So in this case, I don't think the companies in Canada, I don't think they will pay either, because it's now part of the trip global advisory. So companies don't pay for that.
Okay.
Okay.
So I guess, Hutan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess this time was different because it was a pandemic, and there was the term that's used in the travel industry, which basically is like the act of God or force majeure, which a lot of things has changed as a result of basically that pandemic and the force majeure situation.
Oh
Which
yeah, exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
which allowed a lot of tour operators so typically if you're, let's say if you're buying a package from Transat or any of, let's just pick a Caribbean example. So if you're getting a package 7 days all inclusive to Mexico, and for any reason you can't go and you don't have travel insurance, there is no future travel credit, nothing. But this year, because of the pandemic and this term force majeure, the tour operators were forced to give that future travel credit to their customers. But that was like quite a situation, which never happened in the past. So it was very, very unique. And I guess because of that, a lot of insurance companies are basically saying that, well, you're getting this, your trip is not fully canceled and it's just postponed to a different date as a result of pandemic, and that's why they are basically saying that they are not paying that insurance.
Yeah, exactly, because of the credit. Now, as you mentioned, Leila, if it wasn't the pandemic, then the trip cancellation will cover you for sickness or for illness, for these kind of things. So the trip cancellation is in place for that, but unfortunately, because of the pandemic, as you exactly said, you mentioned it, exactly. So that's that. So it is for that, but unfortunately not for the pandemic.
I guess the only situation that people may have been able to get their money back was if they had canceled basically with that tour operator saying, I no longer want that future travel credit, I want my money. That I'm actually working with one of my clients to do that. So we've canceled their trip and said, she no longer wants the future travel credit, so we're trying to get that money from the travel insurance company. But again, like that's something that you really have to work with that, the insurance broker to make sure that, you're aware of all the policies. Because one of the things that I was really cautious was, what if we cancel the future travel credit so she can no longer travel, and then the travel insurance also rejects the claim. And then that would be like the worst case scenario. But we made some assurances along the way that the travel insurance will pay if we cancel the future travel credit. But again, that's the case with Canada. I can't speak to the situation in the US. So if you have any other question, Hutan, is there anything else that you wanted to mention generally about travel insurance, or things that we need to be cautious, or, some last thoughts?
Not really. I think you pretty much covered it. A lot of people, just one other thing that I've noticed a lot of people ask is that keep in mind that travel insurance is for emergency services. I've had clients that ask me, oh, can I go do a checkup? right? And that's not that's not what it's in there for. It's for any emergency. Now, it could be a sickness, a simple sickness, or an injury, but that's what it's for, emergency purposes, right? That's one thing that I always get. But no, other than that, I think you covered it. It's great.
Awesome. It's so, interesting that since things actually happened to myself, as I mentioned, I'm speaking from my prior experiences that I know a lot of younger people, they don't take travel insurance seriously. I guess when we, age a little bit, we may take that a little bit more serious. But my advice is always make sure that, either you're working for a company, so you have some group benefits, make sure that what type of coverages you have. If you have credit card coverages, make sure you're fully aware of what that covers. Because, we were so many times in so many different trips with some of our friends, and they were thinking that their credit card is, I'm not going to name some names, but it actually has some like travel something credit card in the name of the card, and yet it doesn't cover the delay. It doesn't cover like sort of like overnight if you're stuck at this airport and things like that. So, I've really seen it with my own eyes, and have experienced it. And that's why I highly encourage people to really take travel insurance seriously. But if you don't have any questions, so feel free. I'm just going to go back to, feel free to follow Hootan or reach out to Hootan. Hootan at tipservices.ca. And if you are not following me on Instagram and Facebook, I highly encourage you to do so. And I'll be keeping those virtual travel series with different focus and, exploring different destinations. But Hootan, I wanted to really thank you for taking your time and sharing your experience with myself and my audience. I'm also broadcasting this live to Facebook, so people will be able to watch it live on Facebook, and they will be able to watch it later on as well. And this will be posted on my website and all the videos. So I'm sure that this will be a very informative session about travel insurance, and I hope that we've covered everything. But again, thank you so much for taking your time.
No problem. Thank you for having me. Now, if anybody has any questions or they just want to, know how much it costs, you can email me or message me on Instagram or Facebook. I'll be glad to email you the prices, and so you'll know how much it is. Personally, I always look at it as a way that, yes, it's going to cost a little bit more, but hopefully we're never going to need it, but if we do, it's a great thing to have. So I strongly urge people to get it. Thank you for having me. I hope I answered most of your questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Hootan. Thank you. Have a great evening, everyone.
You too. Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.